1978 was one of the most important years for Cedar Point. This was the year that the park opened their new racing roller coaster called Gemini, a ride that Cedar Point claimed was the tallest and fastest coaster in the world. Standing at a height of 125 feet, this racing coaster dominated the midways of Cedar Point and really was the first large-scale record-breaking coaster in the history of the park. Fast forward to present time, and Gemini hardly ever runs both sides at once and is even closed on certain operating days. No wonder why there have been rumors about the future of the 3,935-foot-long coaster designed by Aerodynamics. Now for the real intriguing part of this. The total size of the Gemini plot of land is 3 acres, which means that there are many different options for Cedar Point when it comes to redeveloping this area. So how much longer will Gemini be a part of Cedar Point's lineup, and what could Cedar Point replace this classic coaster with? As of 2024, you can only find 3 other coasters at the park that are older than Gemini, and they are Blue Streak, Cedar Creek Mine Ride, and Corkscrew. And why Gemini is considered a classic coaster among most of us, it doesn't mean that Cedar Point will always have this ride in operation. The biggest question that I think Cedar Point will have to make over the next 5 years is, what roller coaster do they need to remove first? Because I think there's a very good chance that it's either going to be Iron Dragon, Cedar Creek Mine Ride, Corkscrew, or Gemini. And I predict that by 2040, none of these coasters will be in operation at the point in their current form. Unless Cedar Point is going to be doing what Busch Gardens Williamsburg did with Loch Ness Monster and spend millions of dollars preserving these rides. But here's the thing. The only coaster out of those 4 that I mentioned that would be worth preserving would be Gemini. And as much as I enjoy Iron Dragon, I do not see Cedar Point spending the money on new trains, new track supports, etc. And Cedar Creek Mine Ride and Corkscrew, yeah, doubtful. Now something to think about. Cedar Fair did not want to spend the money on preserving Vortex at Kings Island, then they're definitely not going to want to do it for Iron Dragon, Corkscrew, or the Cedar Creek Mine Ride. Maybe they will for Gemini, but again, I'm doubtful. And here's yet another dilemma. Cedar Point is obviously landlocked, so they have to be very strategic on how and where they can expand to build a new ride. The Gemini plot of land is by far the easiest for Cedar Point to remove and rebuild for multiple factors. And to add even more fuel to that fire, with the staffing situation that America sadly is in right now, and has been since the start of COVID, and as we see rides and restaurants and attractions closed down at parks all across the country due to staffing, and Gemini takes a bare minimum of 8 ride operators to run at full capacity. You have 2 operators, 4 attendants checking both trains, 1 on load and 1 on unload, and the greeter and the fast lane checker. Now those numbers do not include extra staff for breaks and lunches. Staffing is the reason why I think it will be a very long time before we see another racing or dueling coaster open up in America. This is why Cedar Point is in a very interesting situation. And while I would personally hate to see Gemini get removed, the thought about what Cedar Point could replace it with is rather exciting. So I'm going to share with you 3 options that would forever change the footprint of this area, in my opinion, make Cedar Point so much better. Option 1, Camp Snoopy expansion and a new family coaster. Without Gemini, there will be no need for this midway to be called Gemini Midway. So I think we would see Cedar Point give it a whole new theme that's not based around the new ride. To give you an example, if I was in charge of Cedar Point, I would use this area to expand Camp Snoopy. By doing this, the Pipe Scream, Lake Erie Eagle, and the Monster would all be a part of the newly expanded kids area. There would also be enough room to relocate a few of the better kid rides in the current Kiddie Kingdom to the new Camp Snoopy. By doing this, Kiddie Kingdom would get bulldozed to make way for an area that is over 1.5 acres. This would allow Cedar Point to further expand their current boardwalk area to really make this area the best in the park. And now that Kiddie Kingdom is not there, Cedar Point just paved the way for their next coaster location after the Gemini replacement. But back to my Camp Snoopy expansion idea. While the area would use up a little bit of the Gemini plot of land for relocating some of the current rides in Kiddie Kingdom, Cedar Point would still have roughly this much room to work with for a new coaster. So the good news is, Cedar Point will be expanding Camp Snoopy and relocating the best rides from Kiddie Kingdom to this expansion, freeing up a huge plot of land for further developments, and to top off that, still have a ton of room in the Gemini plot of land for a new coaster. Now, who could complain about this idea? You might be wondering, would the new coaster be a family-sized since it's located next to the new Camp Snoopy expansion? And honestly, it could very well be. I would love to see a coaster along the same size as Big Bear Mountain down at Dollywood make its way to Cedar Point. Now that Cedar Fair and Vekoma are working together, I would love to see a coaster that offers 2 to 3 launches and over 3,000 feet of track with a twisted layout filled with fun. This is something that would benefit Cedar Point the most in my personal opinion. Option 2 is a new themed area with a new roller coaster. If Camp Snoopy does not get expanded into the Gemini Midway, then we would see a new theme given to this area once Gemini is gone. And this new coaster would be themed around whatever the new theme would be, obviously. As for the coaster itself, we have to look at what Cedar Point lacks the most when it comes to their coaster lineup. A flying coaster, a modern wooden coaster, a shuttle coaster, and an Exa coaster. I'm just kidding, but you know, a 600-foot tall coaster in this location will be legit awesome. And we cannot talk about Cedar Point's next coaster and not bring up a ride from Mock Rides. Something like an extreme spinner just makes so much sense for Cedar Point. So as you can see, there's a lot of different types of coasters that would fit perfectly in this area. And if this area happens to be home to Cedar Point's next major coaster after Top Thrill 2, then I predict we're going to be looking at a record-breaking Mock Rides Extreme Spinner. But there's still one more coaster out there that would, in my opinion, be the best option for this type of ride. Option 3 is the first of its kind record-breaking roller coaster. If, and I mean if, Cedar Point would ever build an RMC T-Rex, then the Gemini plot of land makes the most sense for this magnitude of a ride. RMC would have a ton of room to work with and do whatever twisted things that they would ever want in this area, and at the same time, they don't have to worry about this coaster interacting with other rides and other coasters. In fact, I love this idea so much that I wanted to show you just how I could see a new RMC T-Rex fitting in this plot of land. And you can see that the station and queue line area would be located near the same location as they were for Gemini. The lift hill for the new coaster would also run in the same direction as Gemini in pretty much the same location. The first drop would be a 90-degree twisted one that would become one of the best in the entire world. As far as the lift hill's height goes, it would be over 325 feet tall. As for the rest of the layout, riders would experience overbank turns, outward bank turns, a stall, S-turns, airtime hills, a zero-G twisted snake dive element, a wave turn, and finishing off the layout with an Immelman that leads right into the brake run. From start to finish, this new coaster would become the best one in the history of Cedar Point. So will Cedar Point remove Gemini by 2030? I predict that there's a very good chance of that happening. And we all know that Cedar Point will replace Gemini with a new coaster of some kind, which is great news for all of us. You'll never guess how I rank the coasters at Cedar Point, so be sure to check out my ranking video right here. So what are your predictions about the Gemini plot of land, and what do you think about my ideas for it? As always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to smile today, think positive, and keep riding coasters.